Awesome. How's it going? All right, so I'm not gonna lie, right off the bat, I'm getting like a little bit of like a Vietnam flashback from when I was in the 3rd grade competing in the spelling bee. Huge ego going in, I thought I was gonna win, and I lost that on the 1st round in front of the entire grade. Like not even the entire grade, the entire school. But I think I'm gonna be good with this so long as I don't have to spell grammar. So I'm here to talk about being a good platform citizen, something that I care very deeply about and has been referenced in a lot of other talks throughout, today, yesterday. But first, a little about myself. I'm Dan Stepanov. Like stated earlier, I started in chemical engineering, but then decided that sucked, and I decided to start coding. I became an iOS developer primarily, and then I went to a meetup at Hannah House in Palo Alto, where a guy named Charlie Cheever was giving a talk on something called Exponent. And I had no idea what he said when he went up there, but I knew he had been involved with Facebook and worked at Quora, and I told him as much when I met him then. He actually still has the sweater he was wearing then now with him that says Exponent on it. And I just started working with React Native and Exponent since then. It's been almost 10 years, and that's crazy. But in the last 2 years, I've spent a lot of that time focusing on developer tooling for React Native developers. I created a library called Create Expo Stack, and most recently I started working on NativeWind, and I launched something called NativeWindUI. So that's a bit about me. Let's talk about where React Native is today. A lot of users, a lot more than when I started. And it's pretty obvious why that is. It gives us the ability to create cross-platform applications, operate out of a single code base. Like a lot of this group of people that come in, they're coming from web. And a lot of those web folks, and just people who haven't operated in native platforms, they don't come with necessarily an understanding of what native feel is, because there really isn't one on the web. So this is really good, because we have a lot of meaningful contributions that come in. We have a lot more people working on stuff. But it also comes with a trade-off. And that trade-off is that we end up with a lot of applications that are just slightly off. Something's not right with them. And I've thought a lot about why that might be. And it seems to me that the reason for that is because React Native does not provide a straightforward path by which you, the developer, can understand and implement, realize native feel, right? A native feeling application. And so if you're coming from, say, native iOS development or Android development, you come with that knowledge of what that means and how maybe to implement that, what you're looking to achieve. However, the uninitiated are going to come in and they're going to create some stuff either intentionally or unintentionally, and it's different from what they expected. Now hold on. You might look at me and say, someone told me React Native is native. And technically you're right. But in this case, that is the worst kind of right. Because what that actually means is that React Native provides you access to native tooling. And simply having access to native tooling, to the right set of tools, does not mean that you are going to get something out the other end that is native feeling. So what is an actual example of this? This is Akira Toriyama, who was an incredible person. And when given colored pencils, he would create beloved characters and worlds that we could immerse ourselves in, that I certainly immersed myself in. I don't know if anyone else here is a Dragon Ball Z fan, but yeah, huge impact on me. You know, and when I was 13 or what have you, and I'm watching Dragon Ball Z, I take to the same colored pencils, to those same native tools, right? And you give those to me, and you come out with this hellspawn. Now, obviously, there is a difference between these two, right? There's a very meaningful gap. And we call the process, if we say that is native feel, then the process of crossing this gap is called being a good platform citizen. The only difference is that for us, rather than Dragon Ball Z, rather than anime, our environments, our platforms are iOS, Android, web, and all the other things that come with it. So just to kind of drive this point a little further home, it's important to understand that native feel, being a good platform citizen, it's not a React Native thing. And to use this example, see if you can just like surmise which stack was used to build which application here. Give you a second, think about it. The truth is both of them were built using SwiftUI. And this is to highlight, like I said, that it is not about the tools. You can build something that isn't native feeling with any set of tools. It's not about the tools, it's about the intent. So, a very wise developer recently at a conference in May said, native feel is the most important benchmark. And I am inclined to agree. But what does it actually mean? So every one of these platforms has its own community, a marketplace of applications that all feel native to, and establish what native even is, to the respective platform. You, the developers, and your applications that you make are citizens of these communities. And you should aim to do the work to fit into those communities. But why should you care? That's a lot of work, and it's not the work you necessarily want to do. Whether you choose to do that work, not caring about native feel in your applications will at best make it more difficult for developers or customers to do what it is you want them to do. And at worst, it'll actually stop them from doing that thing altogether. So it will affect you whether you choose to do that work or not. So now that we understand a little bit better about good platform, or native feel, I should say, what actually goes into practicing good platform citizenship? How can we do it? And there's a lot, like a lot. But I'm going to try to meaningfully condense it for the purposes of this talk. Humans are incredible at pattern recognition and pattern matching. And the bar, since even like 10 years ago, I mean even since 2 or 3 years ago, the bar keeps getting higher for applications, mobile applications especially. Like your application has to be performant, it has to feel familiar to the person relative to the platform, and you have to make sure that everything in your application allows the user to focus on their primary task. More importantly then, you don't want to reinvent the wheel, which I see a lot of people trying to go about it in that way. Apple and Google have respectively spent a lot of time, over a decade or more, on researching and understanding what are the right ways to build applications. What does native feel mean? And you would do well to read and revisit, study their learnings, and apply them to your applications. This is an ongoing thing. This is not something that you'll do once. This is something you're going to want to come back to, especially as things like material design come up with new versions, as iOS sees new things as well. The next thing in the guidelines is you're going to want to support familiar interactions. And this one is actually very expansive. There are a lot of complex tasks that you might want your users to accomplish. And it's up to you to take those tasks and break them down into straightforward things that they can get done, in a way that makes sense to them, in a way that makes sense to the platform that they're using. You want to keep interactions as simple as you can. You want to support common complex gestures, so multi-touch, pinch to zoom, all of these things that the devices and the applications you've grown used to are already doing. And you want to provide alternative ways for your users to perform the core functionalities of your application. A good example of that is when you take a picture with your camera, right? You can use the button at the bottom of the screen, but they know that some people take pictures sideways and maybe sort of at arm's length. So they allow you to take a picture with the volume down button for just a more accessible experience. Finally, you want to leverage the device's capabilities. And this is particularly where Expo's tooling comes in really well. They provide, or the device provides, Expo makes it easy within React Native to serve things like haptic feedback, right? Biometric scanning, using the accelerometer. All of this stuff, these are things that you want to study and understand. Is this going to make my experience even better, even simpler for the user? So how can we actually put these guidelines into practice? Or how have I put them into practice? Recently, I've been working on something called NativeWindUI. And for anyone familiar with Tailwind and TailwindUI, there's basically NativeWind as the equivalent, being Tailwind for React Native. And then as an extension in the same way, there's NativeWindUI for React Native. What we do is that we use Tailwind to craft high-fidelity components that treat native feel as the highest benchmark, like that quote from Fernando Rojo. Let's explore how the NativeWindUI team practices good platform citizenship. And if you care to follow along and you want to explore some of the other things, you can scan this QR code and look at some of the free examples in there to just get a sense of like, well, what does it look like? What does it feel like? And what does that look like on an implementation level? You can also look at this later if you'd like. So before we set out to sort of jump right in, right? React Native will allow us to go right into the task, for better or for worse. And before we do that, we want to understand what expectations our users have. Our users happen to also be developers, just like us. And so we spend a lot of time on what is it that they exactly want to do. And let's say they want to build a chat interface, right? We've seen a chat interface. And they want to target iOS and Android specifically, where this makeup is the same for both iOS and Android, but there are subtle differences that they're going to encounter. When we look at this chat interface, we notice there is the title header, there's the list view, right? We have the messages in there, and input at the bottom of the screen. There's some sort of there's like background elements that say when you swipe sideways to show the time when a message was sent. And there's a few things hidden behind the scenes that are important to note. But for the most part, a lot of chat interfaces are the same. We are going to focus on one of these elements, the message. When we look at that message and we take what we've learned from the human interface guidelines, from the material design docs, and all of the other existing applications that are out there that feel native, we know that one of the interactions that folks are familiar with is the long press. And when they long press an item, a message, they expect a drop-down menu to appear that provides them meaningful actions to perform with respect to that message. So we're like, OK, we get that that's what the user expects to be able to do. Let's break that down into visual requirements and behavioral requirements. The visual requirements are very similar. And they kind of begin to pop into your head pretty immediately. You have this recollection of what they look like. They largely look the same, save for a couple of differences between the two platforms, right? So we know what the end product is meant to look like. Different aspects of it are meant to look like, how items are supposed to align. And this is what our components should look like once we're done. Moving forward, we also have behavioral requirements. And this is a little bit more expansive for something like a drop-down menu, a context menu. What all goes into this? Our component should be easy to open, select, and close. It needs to support labels and custom action items, including toggles and loading indicators, as well as image and emoji support, like you saw earlier. We need to support nested submenus. So you click into the menu, you present it, you click another list item, it pops open a submenu. That needs to be in there. You also need to be able to pan tap to close the item, again, offering them alternative ways to do the same core functionalities. All throughout this, these like the transitions, they have to be smooth. We can't compromise that because it will remove the native feel. It has to be highly performant. And the API, like I said, our users are developers. That's not necessarily going to be the case for y'all, but for us it is. So an additional aspect is that the API has to be clean. One last note is that we have to support platform-specific functionality. And one thing that we know that exists on iOS, but that doesn't exist generally in material design, is that iOS supports inline action items, which is to say action items that are horizontal in addition to the ones that are vertical. So we have to be mindful of that. Important to note before we move further, there's no room for compromise here. This is the minimum bar. It has to meet this, and if something doesn't do it, we're going to have to spin our own solution. So now we can move on to exploring existing libraries. So in an effort to not reinvent the wheel, we look to Google, I guess, and the React Native community to find libraries that do this. And we quickly find that iOS is handled really well. It covers fully all of our requirements for our component, maintains the smooth transitions, and there's virtually no difference. However, the ones that also cover Android then, they're not quite what we're looking for. We're looking for that Material 3 look. Maybe they have Material 2, or maybe their types aren't done properly. It doesn't fit. It fits a lot of our requirements, but it doesn't fit all of them. So unfortunately, so the pro here is we'll get to use that underlying iOS library for our implementation, but we're going to have to spin our own solution for Android. In building out a custom solution, we turn to, again, tools that are available to us out of the box, just now on a lower level. We actually ended up having to build out something on an even lower level now to support our first 4 requirements. So we stood up something called RN primitives. If you'd like to take a look or use it for your own purposes, it's available at rnprimitives.com. RN primitives allows us to support all of the interactions that we expect, as well as stacking different components within each other to support other components, right? So you can imagine the context menu has things like the button and text, other things in there. And it'll take care of all of that. So all we have to worry about is how we want to style, what we want to make that visually then. So we stood up RN primitives, and the RN primitives specific context menu component is going to handle those first 4 requirements. Next, we turn to React Native Reanimated for smooth transitions while maintaining performance. When we need to fill these gaps of what it looks like, that's where we'll throw in additional styling with NativeWind. Some of the libraries that we were exploring we don't use because they couldn't support NativeWind. And where we end up is that we have now a component for each platform that visually looks and behaves the way we expect it to. Not only this, we've minimized platform-specific code, which can get messy to maintain. And we've created a generic component that is ready for consumption by our chat interface that we are putting together. This is a process that we are going to want to reuse for everything else. So now we go back to our chat interface, and we slot that in. We apply then that process, like I said, to the rest of our components, to the elements on the screen, everything in the foreground and in the background. And we bring that all together, and this is what we get. This is React Native using NativeWind. This is a fully native experience with a questionable resolution, I will give you that. But I blame whatever is used to record movies on my Mac. The interactions are there. The visuals are there. Everything we expect is there, and like I said, with minimal platform-specific code. This process works for us incredibly well. It's been very reliable in standing up everything that's listed in NativeWindUI. And we encourage you to adopt a similar process, because ours might not be perfect for you. You might have a different sense of the mix between native feel and what your users come to expect. You might support different platforms that we don't think about. But you should have this kind of process, and you should respect it. To recap, we went through this entire process and set expectations. We explored what exists already, and we built out anything that we needed to fill the gaps. We need to reframe as a community what we come to expect of React Native. You can use any set of tools that you want, and you will still end up potentially practicing poorly good platform citizenship. The worst part is that you might stumble upon using a set of tooling that actually makes it easy to do the wrong thing. And you need to be mindful of that. You need to hold yourself to a high standard the same way your users hold your application to a high standard. You want to find the best way, you want to challenge yourself to find the best way to implement, whether it's a component or your entire application, find the best way to do that, not just the best way for the tools that you're using. For your users, you want to make it easy for them to stumble into doing the right thing, and you want to make it annoying, but not impossible, for them to do the wrong thing. React Native itself does not make you a good platform citizen. And your application not turning out the way you expect it to is not necessarily the fault of React Native. There is no platform that will guarantee you getting that native feel exactly what you want out the other end. However, through React Native, you have access to an incredible set of tools that's only getting better, and a community that wants to help you achieve what you are aiming to build. And so with that said, thank you for coming to this conference, and good luck building your applications.